Please be seated. The story goes that a young man was visiting his extended family in England, the English countryside, when he encountered, through happenstance, the local nobleman, who was very gracious and invited him to come over for an afternoon party. So our young friend made the journey to the nobleman's manor on foot and arrived at the appointed hour, saw the teeming hordes around the manor house, saw the master of the house standing at the entrance of his garden, and was horrified to discover that all of the men were in dinner jackets, and he was in shirt sleeves. So as he assessed his surroundings, he looked first to see if anyone had seen him, that he might slip away quietly, undetected. And just as he thought he was out of there, he was shocked to discover that the master of the house saw him, recognized him, and was walking in his direction. So there was nowhere to go. The master of the house approaches him dressed in all of his finery, takes our young friend by the arm, and leads him to the entrance of the garden. As guests line up, waiting to enter. And our young friend is horribly embarrassed. And all sorts of thoughts roll through his head really quickly. He wonders what the master of the house will do. Will he introduce him and then send him quickly home to grab a jacket and return, which would be horribly embarrassing? But one avenue. Perhaps the master of the house will send a servant upstairs to his wardrobe to retrieve a jacket that might more or less meet his needs, which again would be embarrassing, wearing borrowed clothing. Our young friend wasn't ready for what did happen. Because as the master of the house arrived with our guest in tow, the first servant he encountered was stopped that he might take the master's jacket and carry it upstairs, that the master of the house might join his inappropriately attired guest in shirt sleeves as well. The way the host manages this encounter, his conduct, tells us something about him, doesn't it? He was willing to be thought something of a rube himself. He was willing to go down rather than call his young guest up. He was willing to do anything to maintain the dignity of his guest and his stranger. Willing to offer a little of himself, just a little, a tiny act of grace, a small act. But it does tell you something about the quality of the man. It tells you something about the way he sees himself and the way he sees others in the world around him. The gospel for this Sunday dubbed Christ the King, unfolds to tell us something about Jesus. But even more, it illustrates the nature of his kingly authority. You've just heard the story. Jesus forgives as he faces an execution that he doesn't deserve. He quietly endures the taunts and injuries of those around him, focused on what he is to do rather than the noise around him. And finally, Jesus offers peace, eternal peace, lasting peace, paradise to a thief, a bandit beside him, who in no way deserves it except that he asks for it. Now, I suppose we could applaud Jesus and his virtue. How nicely done. How well behaved. How delightful the Son of God manages the trials before him. He has real stick-to-itiveness. Isn't that nice? We could marvel at his self-control, the way he stays within his being in those difficult moments. And we could hold all of this up as a model that we might seek to emulate. But that would leave us really missing the best part. It would leave us missing the very core of who Jesus is and the nature of his salvific ministry. Because, friends, Jesus offers himself up freely as the definitive personal picture of the love of God and the way that God chooses to exercise his kingly authority and dominion. It's not marked by the trappings of royalty. It's not marked by some kind of throne room with countless servants surrounding and fanning the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings. It's marked by the God of love pouring out life. It's marked by the exercise not of absolute power or personal pleasure or prestige. It's marked by Jesus pouring out his divine life and human life to take upon himself the consequences of human brokenness and sin and death in a broken world that needs to see desperately another kind of power. Kenosis. Self-offering, self-authenticating, sacrificial love. That's how God is involved in the world. Through the life and death. Through the participation in real human existence. Jesus makes himself King and Lord. I've spent more than half my life working closely with my own father. Some great days and some not so great days. Family businesses are complicated, to say the least. And I remember once when my father doubled the size of his manufacturing facility, the last piece that needed to be tidied up had to do with the septic system. We needed to tie the existing septic system to the new septic system in the new part of the building. And in my family, being uber self-reliant, we have tools to make tools, okay? So I'm out there one afternoon with a backhoe. I excavate the existing septic tank, and I create a space for the new one. And the plumbing supply people come and drop off the new septic tank. And I have a trench excavated where we're to put a line to tie the two together. So when we're ready for that stage, I go to my father and I say to him, really ask the question, how would you like me to proceed at this point? How do you envision this connection happening? And he said, well, you see that sledgehammer? You're going to take that sledgehammer and you're going to break a hole in the old septic tank. And once that hole is there, you're going to take a pipe and you're going to stick it in that hole, and then it will connect with the new septic tank, the hole that's already pre-cut in the new septic tank. And that's how these two things will be tied together. So I thought for a millisecond, and I said, Dad, you realize what's going to happen as this hole comes into that old septic tank, right? And he said, I know precisely what will happen at the moment you breach that old septic tank. So lots of ideas came to the fore, and I explored them with my father, the first of which was having someone else do this. And I still believe that's perhaps the right instinct. And I groused around for a few minutes, and I remember my father stopping me as I got out of hand at one point and said, son, I would never ask you to do anything that I haven't done or wouldn't do. Friends, this festival of Christ the King, this commemoration prior to Advent of Jesus' death, at its heart is God marking the fact that God wouldn't ask us to live a life, offer a sacrifice that God wasn't willing to own as God's self. This marking of Christ the King, Lord of Lords, is the moment where we recognize the depth of God's love for humankind, God's grasp of the human condition, not by observing it, not by witnessing it from some distant throne, but from putting on shirt sleeves and mixing in it and living it and dying in it as well. Friends, the time has come. The time is now for us to put on shirt sleeves, to enter a world that needs to be embraced and welcomed, and to know that the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords is a King and Lord of love. We're called to enter this world to bring about its salvation. And we do it following a Lord who has gone before us.